The policy of Irish neutrality during World War II was adopted by the Oireachtas at the instigation of the Taoiseach Éamon de Valera upon the outbreak of World War II in Europe. It was maintained throughout the conflict, in spite of several German air raids by aircraft that missed their intended British targets and attacks on Ireland's shipping fleet by Allies and Axis alike. De Valera refrained from joining either the Allies or Axis powers, while the possibility of not only a German but also a British invasion were discussed in the Dáil, and either eventuality was prepared for, with the most detailed preparations being done in tandem with the Allies under Plan W. De Valera's ruling party, Fianna Fáil, supported his neutral policy for the duration of the war. This period is known in the Republic of Ireland as the emergency, owing to the wording of the constitutional article employed to suspend normal government of the country. Pursuing a policy of neutrality required attaining a balance between the strict observance of non-alignment and the taking of practical steps to repel or discourage an invasion from either of the two concerned parties. Despite the official position of neutrality, there were many unpublicized contraventions of this, such as permitting the use of the Donegal corridor to Allied military aircraft, and extensive cooperation between Allied and Irish intelligence, including exchanges of information, such as detailed weather reports of the Atlantic Ocean. For example, the decision to go ahead with the D-Day landings was decided by a weather report from Blackshead Bay, County Mayo. Pre-war relationship with Britain. Ireland was in 1939 nominally a dominion of the British Empire and a member of the Commonwealth. The nation had gained de facto independence from Britain after the Anglo-Irish War, and the Anglo-Irish Treaty of 1921 declared Ireland to be a sovereign, independent, democratic state. A new constitution was adopted by a plebiscite in 1937. The Statute of Westminster meant that unlike in World War I, Britain's entry into the war no longer automatically included its dominions. Relations between Ireland and Britain had been strained for many years. Until 1938, the two states had engaged in the Anglo-Irish trade war. Nevertheless, Ireland did not sever its vestigial connection with the Crown, and it was not until the Republic of Ireland Act 1948 that the final nominal link was severed. No representatives of the new state attended Commonwealth conferences or participated in its affairs, but Ireland remained a legal member until the British Ireland Act 1949, which accepted the declaration of a republic and formally terminated its membership in the Commonwealth. Alongside George VI's few remaining powers, the 1937 Constitution had provided that the holder of the new office of President of Ireland was in supreme command of the Defence Forces. Internal affairs. Irish neutrality was supported by the population of Ireland, although a minority favoured fighting against the Axis powers. Irish citizens could serve in the British Armed Forces, as at least 50,000 in the British Army did, as well as in the Merchant Navy and Royal Air Force, with some rising up the ranks rapidly, such as the youngest wing commander fighter ace in the RAF's history, Brendan Finnegan. 4,983 members of the Defence Forces deserted to fight with the British and Allied armed forces. After the war they faced discrimination, lost the rights to pensions and were barred from holding government jobs. They were finally pardoned in 2012. Travel passes and identity cards were also issued to 245,000 people to enable them to travel to Britain to work. A tiny fraction of people within the broader Irish Republican movement allegedly sided with Germany at the onset of the war, believing that a German victory might bring about a united Ireland. Moreover, in a war in which the United Kingdom was involved, neutrality was perceived perceived as the clearest expression of Irish sovereignty, something the Taoiseach fervently sought. In response to claims that Ireland had failed to take up the moral fight against Nazism, the Secretary of the Department of External Affairs, Joe Walsh, answered in 1941 that, on the 1st of September 1939, in response to the German invasion of Poland, a hastily convened Dáil declared an immediate state of emergency. The Emergency Powers Act that the day's debate culminated in came into effect one day later, on the 3rd of September. It was modelled extensively on the British draft worked out during the Sudeten crisis a year before. In some respects the Irish Act was regarded as more drastic. The key provisions were as follows. With such sweeping executive powers, de Valera's cabinet set out to tackle any problems that might arise and curb any inconsistencies with the nation's policy of neutrality. Censorship of radio newscasts meant newsreaders were confined to reading, without comment, the dispatches of each side, while weather forecasts were halted to preclude the inadvertent assistance of planes or ships involved in the war. Public expressions of opinion appearing to favor one side or the other were usually repressed. The word war itself was avoided, with the government referring to the situation in Europe from 1939 to 1945 as the emergency. However, on the British declaration of war, the teenage George Cole, watched as an effigy of Neville Chamberlain was publicly burnt in Dublin, without any interference by the police. Cole sensed that the social and economic conditions in Ireland at this time were harsh. Wages stagnated but prices rose. There were serious shortages of fuel and some foodstuffs. Many people balked against the moral diktats of church and state in the economic realm. Meanwhile, cross-border smuggling and the black market underwent something of a boom. Prelude to war. The Irish government had good reason to be concerned lest the war in Europe reopen the wounds of the Civil War. There were pro- and anti-fascist movements in Ireland, and the IRA continued to pursue its own agenda. Former Old IRA commander and founder of the Fine Gael party, General Eoin O'Duffy, became a leader of the fascist Blue Shirt organisation in 1932-33. In recognition of his consistent support for Ireland's Jews, Éamon de Valera, Ireland's Taoiseach during the war, has a forest in Israel named in his honour. In this context, it is relevant to note that two Irish contingents fought in the 1937 Spanish Civil War, but on opposing sides. O'Duffy's pro-nationalist Irish Brigade fought with the Nationalists, and the pro-Republican Irish contingent of the International Brigades fought with the Republicans, though neither had government support. In the 6 months prior to the onset of war, there had been an escalation of Irish Republican Army violence and a bombing campaign in Britain under the new leadership of Sean Russell. De Valera, who had tolerated the IRA as recently as 1936, responded with the Offences Against the State Act, 1939. Upon the outbreak of the main conflict in September, subversive activity was regarded as endangering the security of the state. There were fears that the United Kingdom, eager to secure Irish ports for their air and naval forces, might use the attacks as a pretext for an invasion of Ireland and a forcible seizure of the assets in question. Furthermore, the possibility that the IRA might link up with German agents, thereby compromising Irish non-involvement, was considered. This threat was real. Russell, in May 1940, travelled to Berlin in an effort to get arms and support for the IRA. He received training in German ordnance but died on a submarine while returning to Ireland as part of Operation Dove. A small number of inadequately prepared German agents were sent to Ireland, but those that did arrive were quickly picked up by the Directorate of Military Intelligence. Active Republicans were interned at the Curragh, given prison sentences. 6 men were hanged under newly legislated acts of treason and 3 more died on hunger strike. The Germans also later came to realize they had overestimated the abilities of the IRA. By 1943, the IRA had all but ceased to exist. In Ireland, neutrality was popular, despite rationing and economic pressure. Ports and trade at the outbreak of the war, Ireland was isolated as never before. Shipping had been neglected since independence. Foreign ships, on which Ireland had hitherto depended, were less available. Neutral American ships would not enter the war zone. There were a mere 56 Irish ships when the war started. 15 more were purchased at least during the conflict. 20 were lost. In his St. Patrick's Day address in 1940, Taoiseach Éamon de Valera lamented, "No country had ever been more effectively blockaded because of the activities of belligerents and our lack of ships, most of which had been sunk, which virtually cut all links with our normal sources of supply." The diminutive Irish mercantile marine continued essential overseas trading. This period was referred to as the Long Watch by Irish mariners. They sailed unarmed and usually alone, flying the Irish tricolour. They identified themselves as neutrals with bright lights and by painting the tricolour and ERA in large letters on the sides and decks. Yet 20% of seamen perished as victims of a war in which they were non-participants. Allied convoys often could not stop to pick up survivors. Irish ships always answered SOS calls, they always stopped to rescue. Irish mariners rescued seafarers from both sides, but they were attacked by both, predominantly by the Axis powers. Vital imports arrived. Exports, mainly food supplies for Great Britain, were delivered. 521 lives were saved. Many British ships were repaired in Irish shipyards. Despite being frequently encountered as rumours, no U-boats ever used Ireland as a refuelling base. The origins of this claim likely originates with the 1939 dumping of 28 rescued Greek sailors by German submarine U-35 onto the Irish coast. After the U-boat commander Werner sunk the Greek cargo freighter that was bound for Britain with metal ore. This U-boat incident featured on the cover of the popular U.S. Life magazine on the 16th of October 1939. As in the days preceding, news of the dumping was widely published. The magazine and the locals that spotted the unloading of the captured Greeks note that the U-boat had conducted the action and resubmerged before coastal defense aircraft could be directed onto the trespassing vessel. Ireland, Britain's last redoubt. In his book Wings Over Ireland, History of the Irish Air Corps, Donald McCarran gives extensive details on the otherwise secret Rathbluff Aerodrome. He states that as early as the summer of 1940 both governments were worried about the doomsday scenario of a successful invasion of Britain. The RAF would need at least one aerodrome to continue the fight in Ireland, and both the Irish and British armies secretly scouted for a site in the south of Ireland. The other airfields of Riniana near Limerick and Dublin Airport and Baldonnel near Dublin would cover other parts of Ireland, so the RAF was keen on a site near the southeast coast. The Irish army disagreed, fearing a German invasion would overrun it quickly, so both finally agreed on a site in the south of County Tipperary, in the valley of the River Suir, east of the Galtee Mountains. This also suited the Irish army, as they had built a secret command headquarters near a convent school 7 miles away to be used in case of invasion. The name Redoubt was chosen as a cover because such a name is to be found all over Munster. Both sites were completely out of bounds for all normal military operations. With Hitler turning towards the USSR in 1941, the chances of an invasion of Britain waned, and the Irish Army decided to hold a major exercise to test the planning and training it had been undertaking for 4 years. In autumn 1942, as part of this, Redoubt's secret was partially released, with it serving as the airfield for Ireland's 2nd Division during the exercise. After the exercises, Redoubt slipped into obscurity, its fields returning to use as the thoroughbred stud farm they had been before. Victory in Europe Day. In his speech celebrating the Allied victory in Europe, Winston Churchill remarked that he had demonstrated restraint towards Ireland because we never laid a violent hand upon them, which at times would have been quite easy and quite natural. Britain had occupied neutral Iceland in May 1940. In a response a few days later, de Valera acknowledged that Churchill did not add another horrid chapter to the already blood-stained record of Anglo-Irish relations, but asked. In addition, he put the following, that the implications on victory in Europe Day and after, of having not been involved in the war and having suffered the devastation that defined the course of Europe afterwards, is the subject of historical debate. The devastation shared by most of Europe, and Ireland's avoidance of it, was described by F. S. L. Lyons as, in response to which R. Fanning wrote, "One might question the liberating value of war for a people who has so recently emerged from revolution followed by a civil war and in whose midst the IRA still propounded the creed of violence." The Cranbourne Report. Viscount Cranbourne, the British Secretary of State for Dominion Affairs, wrote a letter on the 21st of February 1945 to the British War Cabinet regarding Irish-British collaboration during 1939 to 1945, effect on United Nations membership. The neutrality policy led to a considerable delay in Ireland's membership of the United Nations. Ireland's applications for membership were vetoed by the Soviet Union, a permanent member of the Security Council, from 1946 to December 1955. The original use of the term United Nations in 1942–45 always referred to the Allies of World War II. Ireland had applied to join the UN in 1946, following the demise of the League of Nations, where Irish diplomat Sean Lester was the last Secretary-General. By March 1955, the Minister for External Affairs, Liam Cosgrave, announced that Ireland's application for membership of the UNO still stands, although it remains blocked by an objection in the Security Council. Quote, "For reasons of diplomacy, the government would not state the reason for the objection, nor which country had made it." Sean McBride considered that the UN boycott of Ireland was originally agreed at the 1945 Yalta Conference by Churchill and Stalin. Ireland's acceptance into the UN was announced by John de Costello on the 15th of December 1955.